Hello, Rich or Richard. Which do you prefer?
Just call me Rich.
Rich. Let's stick
Hello.
with Rich. Thanks so much, Rich, for joining me today. It's brilliant to have you here. And I'm really looking forward to asking you some questions that will hopefully help to eke out your story and inspire other people who are thinking about doing a career change, which I know that you have done. And I know that you've got a really great story to tell. So I'm really excited to delve into that. Thanks so much for being here. So I know that up until 2020, you had this career that by anybody's standards was would have been considered, a very successful career. Is that right?
True. Yeah, I think so. I'd been at this particular company I was working for about 10 years, I think, or maybe it might have been a little bit more, and sort of worked up the ranks a little bit and actually ended up in the managing director's position. So well paid, and I'd enjoyed working for the company the whole time, until towards the end, which obviously then prompted the change and why we're having this conversation. But yeah, it was a good 10 years anyway, but that's where the story begins, I guess.
So what happened? I mean, you said you had this career for 10 years and then something changed, right? So excuse me, can you talk us through what changed?
Yeah, it was just, I think, because of the length of time and where the company was. They were actually based in South Wales and I'm based in Hampshire. I live in Hampshire. So I'd been going down the M4 all those years, up and down, staying down in Wales for a few days at a time every week, which was kind of exciting for some time. But then as time drew on, obviously you change, and of course your family develops and relationships and so on. And it was really because I started thinking that I wanted to spend more time at home with the family and the children, in particular, but also then it was compounded by the fact that the company that I had been working for actually got sold to a larger corporate body. Again, a great company, but that sort of did change things a little bit. So it sort of went a little bit more corporate. There was some personnel changes, tougher demands, which again is totally reasonable for the role and the salary and so on. But the combination of that, the travel, the family, and the corporate change is what then got me thinking about doing something different.
Yeah. And what were the thoughts that were going through your head at the time? Because I think for anybody that's been in a role or with the same company for 10 years, actually stepping away from something like that is a big deal, isn't it? So can you talk us through what was going through your mind? What were some of the fears that you had around leaving? And did you have an idea of what you wanted to do? Sorry, that's a lot of questions at once. But if we can go back 2 or 3 years, can you remember what was going through your mind at the time?
Yeah, it was sort of it's a mix of emotions, and I'm sure everybody's got all sorts of different points of view and fears and so on. But the a mix of things like, okay, well, if I did leave, what am I going to actually do? Because this was sort of thinking about a year before I actually sort of left. What am I going to do? Am I still going to be able to command similar salary, pay the bills? But also, of course, if you're part of something, and you have been for sort of 10 years, it's emotional as well, I suppose. So can be a little bit heart-wrenching. In the end, it actually wasn't emotional, to be honest with you. It was quite a relief finally. But so I'll talk more about that as well. But yeah, those were the main fears. But they're also drivers at the same time, because you're really thinking, I can't keep doing this. Yeah, like I said about the reasons as to why I might have moved, because of the family and the travel and so on. You start to put all these things together in your mind and then it prompts you to start coming up with a bit of a plan.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, does that answer the question? I hope.
Yeah, it does. But I'm really interested to hear that, you were saying that there was, that there were fears and reservations that you had, and then ultimately you felt relief. And I'm just wondering how you went from that feeling of, oh my God, what am I doing, to relief. Like, what was that process for you?
It was really difficult, to be honest. I mean, I'm sure many people are faced with this sort of thing, thinking about career changes, moving jobs, etc. It's difficult. You can't really put it into words. It's so many different thoughts and emotions, and also trying to come up with a future plan. That you can say when you look back in retrospect, and there's sort of things I would have done perhaps differently or thought slightly differently. But yeah, I really can't describe it in words because it was so emotional, and it led up to that. I guess what occurred in the transition period is that I managed to negotiate a bit of an exit package. It wasn't loads of money or anything, but it was something that made me feel a little bit satisfied, that gave me a little bit of time once I knew I was leaving and what that point was. And the business was also happy that I was leaving, because I had a lot of colleagues that I worked with for a long time. I didn't want to just sort of leave in the lurch as well. So those are some of those emotions coming out. So I managed to deal with that, speak to all those people honestly, finally come up with a little bit of a plan as to what I was going to do, but also negotiating a little bit of an exit plan, then made it all come together. So yeah, it was just working through all those fears and emotions. The people, the business, what's it going to do next? Obviously they were looking for a replacement for me, so I was working diligently with that person and some of the other team to hand over in the best possible way. So I wasn't leaving everything as burning bridges or feeling bad about anything. Felt like I'd really given plenty of time to sort of hand things over, which then helped me to feel better about doing it, and a little bit of an exit package to sort of ease the bump in the road at the same time.
No, that sounds amazing. So it obviously didn't happen overnight. How long would you say it took from when you decided, actually, it's time for me to step away from this, to actually doing it? What was that time period?
Well, it probably, it went back probably more than a year prior. So it was during early in 2019 that I started to feel like I wanted to make a change, and I started sort of coming up with some ideas and talking to other people about friends and family about what that could look like, and therefore how I was going to sort of engineer that and make it actually work. So that was, and that's when the fears all kick in. Obviously, you're thinking, oh God, what am I really going to do, and how's it all going to pan out? And then I started these discussions with the new corporate, again in a sensitive way, to see what we could work out between us all. But that was only probably only about 4 or 5 months before actually finishing with the business. That was really sort of kicking it into action, but I'd laid some groundwork prior to that. So these things, of course, I'm sure it's going to be similar for everybody, that they want to maybe quit or move on or do something, but obviously it's a bit silly just to sort of quit overnight, in my opinion. I'm sure some people do, and they can sort of and do that, but for me it was had to be a bit more of a long period to sort of work it out and plan it out.
Yeah, well, that's fine. And I think you're right. I think it's different for everybody. But I think generally speaking, when people do have a bit of a plan, that does tend to help. An exit strategy, if you like, if we're going to put it into corporate terms. You talked about family and friends. Who was in your support network to enable you to make this move?
not many people really, but there was probably only 2 or 3 friends that I felt that I could actually talk to, which are generally outside of my initial circle of friends, plus my wife, Suzanne, that was the main support. So that I could then talk to those people on and off, get some sense checking from them, and particularly Suzanne, who was, she was the best support, probably I'd say. But on the opposite side, then there was some of my other family and my closest circle of friends who didn't really understand it. Couldn't, why, you've got a brilliant job there, you've been there for years, why the hell would you want to
crazy fool?
Yeah. And you want to go and do this, that, whatever you were planning to do, why are you doing it? Yeah, so I wouldn't say there was loads of support or loads of understanding, but there was some key people that helped me in this. But then I was able to obviously do that sense check-in and then explain to the people who perhaps didn't understand it, as to why, and I could then justify it, even if they still didn't agree or whatever. Then I knew in my own mind, the more I talked about it, the more I justified it, the more sense it made to actually do.
Yeah, I love that. And what do you think you've learned about yourself over the last, actually, before we get to that, I think if I was listening to this, I'd be thinking, well, you've told us what he was doing. What the hell is he doing now? So is that okay if we jump to that and talk a bit about what you've ended up doing?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. It was it sort of moved on from there since. But the main reason and the planning that I did to leave the corporate job and go on to do something completely different was it was kind of just an interest that I had. I'd started listening to a lot of podcasts and reading books and all about generating passive income. It was all about economics. I was interested in economics, housing, like the housing bubbles, buying and selling houses. In my lifetime, I've bought and sold different houses I've lived in. Bought one house, then sold that and bought another, and So economics, housing, and so on. So my plan was then actually to sort of go out and invest in a property, and then try and build it up, because I'd been listening to a podcast in particular called the Property Podcast, and there's a couple of guys basically that are all about building property portfolios. There's got these guys who've got loads of houses, which I don't have, but the idea that you could sort of generate, perhaps you could buy one property, do it up or rent it out, and then go on to perhaps finance that and get another one and try and build that up. And I had this idea that perhaps I could build this little property portfolio over a period of time that would then start to replace income and give me more freedom. But that was the outside shell of the plan was about having more freedom, because of course why I left the corporate job was because I was spending too much time away from home. Traveling to Wales, not seeing kids, family and friends as much as I would have liked to, and having more freedom. And I'm sure that's going to be quite a majority of people thinking about that, and how can I create myself a bit more time, spend family and freedom. So that was the outside plan. And then how are you going to achieve that? For me, it was all about finding something I was interested in, that I thought I could turn my hand to, going into property. Perhaps I could do them up. I'm good at DIY. I like working on the numbers, the economics and all that sort of stuff. So that is what ended up being the plan, was to leave the corporate role. Had this little bit of an exit package, but also finding some way of getting other finance that I could then go and get into property and purchase a property. And that's what I ended up doing.
Amazing. And how's that going?
Yeah, not bad. It's just perhaps, good, maybe not as amazing as I thought it might have been, but what has happened is that I have got a lot more time. So I am more flexible now. So I have now gone on and I'm doing some self-employed work at the same time, but we do have these properties now over this last, what is it, almost 3 years, yeah, sort of 2.5 years. Is the first one that I did was basically bought a property that was partly dilapidated. It didn't need massive building work, but it needed new bathroom, kitchen, redecorating, and all this. So I could. So I did a huge amount of research into property and buying something at a good price. Obviously, there's a lot involved in that, but don't listen to me. Listen to the property podcast about that one. And eventually finding a property and buying that, and then I did the work. So then I worked solid for 2 or 3 months on renovating the property. And I was going to sell it initially, actually, but the financing model worked out that I could then rent that property, extract some money from remortgaging, and then go on to buy something else.
Amazing.
And that worked out. Yeah, again, that was tough, but it showed I could then turn my hands to other things. Having done this sort of corporate managing role for mainly managing people for these 10 years, going on to buying property and got 4 properties now that's generating some income. It's it's not quite enough. Like I said, I would have liked to actually get to 6 by now, but obviously economics and the property market, etc., all play into this. But so now I'm doing some sort of kind of part-time self-employed work as well to then top that up. But basically, I've got much more flexibility. It's all been around home. And it has created what I was ultimately looking for, is more time and flexibility with friends and family.
Amazing. So while the rest of the world was in COVID lockdown and doing Joe Wicks and baking every day, you were very busy building your property. What should we call it? Property. What's the word?
the portfolio.
Your property portfolio. I love that. I love that. So what did you learn about yourself during this process? Because it has been a big step for you and a big life change, hasn't it?
Yeah, huge, absolutely huge. Again, with those people that kind of thought it was a crazy thing to do, and even more crazy when just after I'd left the corporate job, the lockdown occurred.
Yeah.
So it obviously made me look rather stupid at the time, because it was impossible to get another job because everything closed down. So I was sort of thrown into having to make it work, I suppose. So another little bit of a luxury of the plan that I'd made did give me some time to do the research, look into the properties, because I didn't really put a bid on anything for about 3 months. It was from about March, and I think I ended up putting some bids into properties in June or July, I think it was, and eventually securing something in, I think it was in August, actually, the first property was secured, and then all the paperwork and everything that was done by the conveyancing completed in November. So it was quite a period of time. On one hand, it looked crazy doing it in lockdown, but on the other hand, it was useful at the same time, because we were just at home and obviously nobody was really spending money. So it was quite cheap to live, and I was doing my research and spending time with the family at home, doing the Joe Wicks as well.
I think it was mandatory for anybody in the UK.
Online quizzes, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So it was also good at the same time, good and bad. And of course, everybody was a bit doubtful about the property market during that period, but it actually worked out to be really good, because the property market was closed for 3 months. And then obviously people then start panicking. So property prices did drop a bit. So I managed to actually buy this first property at a real bargain.
Brilliant.
So yeah, it's kind of worked in favour just by pure chance, because yeah, they obviously wanted to move this property on, so I picked it up at a good price. And then while the lockdown was sort of on and off towards that end of the year, I then spent all the time, sort of November, December, and into January doing all the renovations. And so, of course, you asked about why I learned about myself was it appeared I was slightly crazy, according to some people. B, a genius on the other hand. No, not quite. But I could turn my hand to a lot of different things. That's probably what I learned, is that perhaps I was braver than I thought by doing it and not just sticking to the job. Because I tend to be, I'm not generally a brave person going out doing things. I'm a pretty sort of steady Eddie sort of chap, so I learned that I could do that, and I could actually turn my hand to things. Yes, it was the finances, it was learning something new just because I was interested in it. You've got to learn a lot. Turning my home DIY skills into actually laying floors and putting skirting boards down and all this sort of other stuff around that. So I learned that there was more to me than I thought.
How cool is that? And I mean, how amazing. That must give you a great sense of satisfaction to see. I mean, it's very tangible, isn't it?
Absolutely,
seeing of doing a renovation. So that is true. Yeah, that was really nice. When it was done, is seeing what you put in place. Of course, the hard work doesn't stop straight away, because then we decided to rent it out and then refinancing it. So then I was being the estate agent as well. Then I was having to, market the property. I didn't use an agent to do it myself. So learning all the rules and regulations about being a landlord, doing all the paperwork, showing people around, and then starting to collect the rent. Again, not using an agent. So I don't use an agent at all for the properties. It's all done by myself. So again, I've got that flexibility where I can, if something's needed, and even doing a bit of DIY at one of these rental properties if required, I can go and do. Unless you need a professional, obviously we get those in where required. So yeah, it was. We're not doing botch jobs.
No. Electrics, gas, water. Got to let the pros do it.
Pros into it. That's amazing. For anybody that's listening to this and thinking, oh, I really wish I could make that big career move, what advice would you give them, having been through it?
I mean, it's always thinking about what I would have done better. And one of those things is that I probably would have come up with more of a plan, because I had this idea. I did want to have more time at home, but what was that going to be? What was the backup plan? Well, I guess the backup plan was, I would have gone off and got some other job somewhere. I don't know what that would have been, but and perhaps just planning in a little bit more detail than I actually did. So I had this outline plan, and then I had something I was interested in, but I wasn't quite sure how I was going to get there. So I'd say to people, try and outline it, perhaps write it down more, depending on what sort of person you are. You might be more of a visual person, stick something up on the wall, the dream you've got, or something like that. So, and I didn't do that. I was more internally focused. I perhaps should have done a little bit more of that to sort of see what the dream was and what the plan was actually going to be. Yeah. But on the flip side, of course, I wouldn't personally recommend having a detailed plan, because you just got to jump in at the deep end at some point and give it a go, and you'll find out then that you're actually better at things than you think you are. Because if you've got too much of a detailed plan, it tends to be, I find it's going to fail. Something's going to fail along the way. So if you don't have too much detail, you can't fail on every point. You find successes. I'm quite a positive thinker. So I'm always, I don't have an exact plan, and then something happens and I'm like, oh, it was good, rather than it didn't go to plan, it was bad. So does that make sense?
That makes complete sense. Yeah, it's a fine balance, isn't it?
Between of course.
Having a plan and then actually being flexible enough to change that plan, as things shift, which invariably they do.
Yeah, because otherwise you miss opportunities. And that's the thing, is if you too much detail and the opportunities pass you by. Because if you're a little bit more flexible and looking for what might come up, for me it might have ended up not actually going into the property thing. I was sort of open-minded as to thinking that I would perhaps find a job that was just more flexible. Maybe it was a working at home sort of role or something like that. So I wasn't sort of closing that off.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to have more time around home. And I would like to go into property. But if it hadn't have happened, that would have been fine as well, as long as I could have ended up just being around home more rather than traveling to Wales for another 10 years.
Well, and you've certainly achieved that. So that's amazing. And without sounding patronizing, well done. It's it's one thing to talk about making these things happen, and it is a different thing making it happen, and you're living proof that you can make it happen. So thank you so much for sharing your story. Hopefully it will inspire lots of people, but it certainly inspired me. I loved hearing your story. Thank you very, very much. And
no, thanks, Jess. It's been interesting just to sort of talk about it, really. He's not really done this with anybody before, so thank you. And hopefully, if it can help anybody in any way, that'd be amazing.
Awesome. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks. See you.